Hey everybody, this is a chronology of important world events between 1857 and 1863. It's the first section of part 4 of Maximilien Rubel and Margaret Manale's Marx Without Myth, a chronological study of his life and work. Each part of this book begins with a chronology of world events, important publishing events, and so on, important technological events in the period that's being discussed in the chapter. Because some of these have been kind of long, these chronologies, I've been recording them as separate videos, and I'm going to put them up that way as I get through this book. So here we go. Europe, 1857 to 58. From America, where economic difficulties have followed an excessively rapid development of the railroad industry in scarcely populated regions, a financial crisis extends to Europe. It is in part responsible for renewed agitation for political unity and the consolidation of economic interest on the continent. Also between 1857 and 58, Friedrich Wilhelm IV, now known to be mentally ill, has to abandon the Prussian throne. The regency is assumed by his brother Wilhelm. 1858. An Italian refugee in France, Felix Orsini, unsuccessfully tries to assassinate Napoleon III. Following his arrest and execution the same year, the diplomats of both countries, Italy and France, are stimulated to negotiate for closer understanding. Cavour and Napoleon meet at Plombières-les-Bains for a secret discussion of their interests and conclude an agreement which stipulates that France will support Italy in a war against Austria. Once the Austrians are expelled from Venetia and Lombardy, France is to gain in the settlement the territories of Nice and Savoy. 1859. Cavour's plan bears fruit. Austria is provoked to an attack and is defeated by united Franco-Sardinian troops. A rapidly concluded peace at Villafranca, providing for the establishment of an Italian confederation under papal rule, fails to satisfy Cavour and the Republicans. Under the leadership of Garibaldi, fighting continues. By 1860, plebiscites are held in a number of Italian provinces and constituent assemblies convened. Nice and Savoy declare in favor of annexation to France, while Lombardy opts for union with the Kingdom of Piedmont and Sardinia. Modena and Tuscany soon vote to join United Italy as well. Garibaldi meanwhile overthrows the despotic monarch of Sicily, and with the support of Sardinian forces, triumphantly enters Naples. 1861. Naples and Sicily vote for inclusion in the Sardinian kingdom. At the first meeting of the Italian Parliament, all the provinces are represented except the Papal State and Venetia. Sardinia's Victor Emmanuel II is elected King of Italy. 1860. The first liberal commercial treaty between Britain and France is signed. According to the provisions of, quote, Cobden's Treaty, and tariffs on goods commonly exchanged between the two countries are radically reduced. 1861, an ukase, which is like a decree, an ukase issued by Tsar Alexander II of Russia puts an end to serfdom in that country. Approximately 47 million peasants are affected by this act, which, although granting them legal freedom, does not provide the economic freedom necessary for their independent well-being. For the most part, they now establish themselves as shareholders in the collective property of the mir, the village community, which has to pay redemption money to the former landowners. The individual peasant is not free to leave the collective without permission from the mir. The aristocracy profits enormously from the new economic arrangement. Also 1861, Wilhelm I is ordained King of Prussia after the death of his brother in January. Wilhelm I immediately reorganizes and strengthens the army and then attempts to bend Parliament to his will as well. In 1862, confronted by a parliamentary majority in opposition, he appoints Bismarck to head his ministry. The liberal opposition unites to found the Fortschrittspartei, Progressive Party, which, despite a more democratic program, nevertheless fails to defend the popular demands for electoral rights. 1863, another new party is thus called into life by Ferdinand Lassalle, under the name Allgemeiner Deutscher Arbeiterverein, ADAV, General Union of German Working Men. Its dedicated first aim, the achievement of universal suffrage. 1863. Upon the death of Danish King Frederick VII, the throne passes to Christian IX, in accordance with the London Protocol of 1852. Christian IX's first official act is to confirm a constitutional act annexing Schleswig to Denmark. Although officially bound by the provisions of the London Agreement, Prussia and Austria nevertheless declared their opposition to this incorporation and the separation of Schleswig from Holstein. Prussian troops occupy Holstein and Lauenburg. Also in 1863, Congress Poland revolts against the domination of the Tsar and sets up a provisional national government which declares the country's independence and proclaims land reforms. The Liberals meet with overwhelming opposition from conservative landowners and the bourgeoisie, who prevent the masses from assuming the initiative and extending the revolution to other regions of the country. Despite intervention from England, France, and Austria, the national movement is crushed and Russia reasserts its hegemony. New section, the Americas. 1857, the Dred Scott decision. The U.S. Supreme Court declares that Negroes are not to be considered citizens according to the Constitution and therefore do not enjoy the rights and privileges established therein. 1858, in Mexico, the establishment of a reactionary government which repeals liberal measures of its predecessor and suspends payment on foreign debts incites both internal and external opposition. 1859, self-appointed liberator of the Southern slaves, the abolitionist John Brown invades the South with a party of armed followers and seizes the U.S. arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. John Brown's call to insurrection is not heeded by the slaves, however, and eventually the Southern general Robert E. Lee attacks the fort and captures the Brown party. The affair ends with Brown's conviction on a charge of attempting to incite a slave rebellion and his execution by hanging. 1860. With the election of Abraham Lincoln to the U.S. presidency, the slave state of South Carolina secedes from the Union. 1861. Other southern states soon follow suit and together establish the Confederate Union. They declare Negro slavery essential to the cultivation of their sugar, tobacco, and cotton crops. War is declared by the North on the grounds that the Union must be preserved. France and England, although officially neutral, show signs of hostility towards the North for blockading the coastline and thereby cutting off European exports to and imports from the South. The, quote, cotton famine deprived some 2 million factory workers in England of their usual employment. The Trent affair illustrates the diplomacy with which relations between England and the North are managed. The British Prime Minister demands that the North release 2 Confederate representatives captured on board an English ship. But the Queen, in an effort to avoid an open dispute, countermands his order. 1862. Meanwhile, Napoleon III plans to profit from the Civil War in North America by invading Mexico. Allied with Spain and England, Napoleon III sends troops to force President Juarez to fulfill the financial obligations neglected since 1858. Although a treaty is concluded at Veracruz, France has no desire to abandon her attack and thus breaks with her allies in order to continue single-handed a war of conquest against Mexico. 1863. The plan succeeds and French troops triumphantly enter Mexico City. They establish a provisional government which declares itself in favor of a European monarch, suppress the Mexican press, and expropriate those who fought against France. 1863. In the midst of hostilities, President Lincoln issues an Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves in these states which have repudiated the Union. New section, the Far East. 1857. With the signing of the Treaty of Karagawa between Japan and the USA, Japan is open to foreign commerce. 1857. Also, in India, a religious incident. The native army is given for use in its weapons cartridges greased with animal fat, a substance forbidden to both Mohammedans and Hindus, provokes the mutiny of native soldiers employed in the British military service known as sepoys. The Sepoy Rebellion breaks through the region of Delhi. British-occupied Kanpur is attacked and men, women, and children hostages are ruthlessly massacred. The turning point comes when British troops receive reinforcements which enable them to recapture Delhi. They exact vengeance for the massacres with equally brutal measures against the natives. 1857. Sustained by French military assistance, the British are able to continue the Second Opium War against China. 1858. They occupy Canton, present peace demands to Peking, and insist that the treaty be ratified in the Chinese capital. The emperor refuses to comply, and so, despite the conclusion of the Treaty of Tientsin, which guarantees the British the right to import opium on payment of $50 duty per chest, the fighting continues. 1860. The imperialists ultimately bring about the Treaty of Peking, which ratifies and extends the earlier treaty. England is to receive a higher indemnity covering the costs of the war. New ports are opened to foreign trade, and the first foreign legations are allowed in Peking. New section, Scientific and Technological Progress. 1859. The first accumulator for the storage of electrical energy and its reconversion into current is constructed by Gaston Planté in France. 1860. Two German chemists, Robert Bunsen and Gustav Kirchhoff, demonstrate that infinitesimal quantities of metals can be readily detected with the spectroscope. The discovery marks the beginning of the science of spectral analysis. Marcellin Berthelot introduces synthetic organic chemistry with the publication of his book Chimie organique fondée sur la synthèse. I don't know. Etienne Lenoir markets an early engine operating on illuminating gas, producing pressure from combustion rather than vacuum. The quote, illuminant was a gas of an unsaturated carbon mixture like benzene, propylene, or ethylene. 1863. Charles Tellier invents a process of conservation through refrigeration. Important books published. 1857. Proudhon, Manuel des spéculateurs à la bourse, which was read by Marx. 1857 to 1859, Karl Friedrich Kupen, Die Religion des Buddha und ihrer, Die Religion des Buddha und ihrer Entstehung, which is read by Marx. 1858, Proudhon, La justice dans la révolution et l'Église, which doesn't appear to be read by Marx. 1858, James Mill, A History of British India, which is read by Marx. 1859, Charles Darwin, Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, which was read by Marx. John Stuart Mill, On Liberty. 1861, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Théorie des impôts, or Théorie des impôts, which is probably read by Marx. John Stuart Mill's On Liberty was not read by Marx. Also 1861, George Eliot, Silas Marner, not read by Marx. 1862, Herbert Spencer, First Principles, not read by Marx. 1862, Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, not read by Marx. 1863, Charles Lyell, The Geological Evidences of the Antiquity of Man, which was read by Marx. And 1863, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Du Principe Fédératif, which was read by Marx. Thanks for listening.